This video is sponsored by War Thunder.
During the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, the Germans deployed large numbers of their newest tank, the Tiger II, a 70-ton monster with thick armour and a gigantic 88mm gun. It was the culmination of nearly a decade of German tank design. But on the 20th of December, the Americans would also deploy their latest design for the first time in the Ardennes, a cute 19-ton tank with paper-thin armour and a gun from a medium bomber. But the M24 Chaffee was no joke. This vehicle may not look like much on paper, even compared to the M4 Sherman, but it was one of the most capable and influential tanks of the entire war, and was so impressive that some nations used it into the 1990s. This is the story of the M24 Chaffee, a vehicle that deserves considerably more credit than it usually gets. When the United States entered the war in 1941, light tanks were one of the few things that they actually had quite a lot of. The M3 Stuart family was relatively capable and available in large numbers. But as the heavier M3 and M4 Sherman tanks entered the scene in 1942, the role of the light tank in the US Army began to change. A typical US armoured division had 2 regiments, each with 3 tank battalions, 2 medium and 1 light. US doctrine suggested that light tanks should be used in the front of any attack, using their speed and agility to smash the enemy defences. But considering the M3 Stuart had very thin armour, wasn't all that nimble, and only mounted a 37mm gun, this was borderline insanity. The US Army would learn this the hard way in Tunisia. The M3 was upgraded, with the new M5 offering a more powerful engine, but only a marginal boost to armour, and no change to the anemic 37mm in the turret. Luckily though, a light tank had been in development since February 1941, and was adopted in August 1942 as the M7, medium tank. Wait, what? The M7 program had started life as a 14-ton light tank. Then they added a bigger engine, then a 57mm gun in a new turret, then a 75mm gun. By 1942, this 14-ton light tank had become a 29-ton medium tank, and the US Army already had one of those, so the M7 was axed. This cancellation showed that the existing US light tank doctrine simply wasn't going to work. You just can't have speed, armour and firepower. Light tanks cannot lead attacks. And this is being reported back from the front lines as well, with commanders saying that the M5 was next to useless, outranged by enemy AT guns, not even armoured enough to protect against artillery shells, poor off-road performance, etc, etc. But in the summer of 1943, learning from their disastrous North African campaign, the doctrine and formation of US armoured units changed. All battalions would now be mixed, with 3 medium tank companies and 1 light. These light tanks were to be used exclusively for reconnaissance missions, and this change in requirement allowed American light tank designers to actually make a good vehicle. Good vehicles, bad vehicles, Italian vehicles, you can play them all in this video's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever, with over 2,500 tanks, planes, ships and helicopters from the 1920s to present day, including almost every vehicle mentioned in this video. War Thunder throws you into the turret, cockpit or bridge of history's most iconic war machines, then pits you against 95 million other players. The vehicle roster is huge, the damage model is realistic, and the sound design really puts you inside the fight. If you've ever wanted to nurse a crippled Spitfire back to base or hold a ridgeline in a Chaffee against hordes of Panzers, War Thunder is the game for you. And it's available right now for free on PC and consoles, and is optimized to allow you to play on even lower end devices with no extra hardware required. In-depth damage models, X-ray damage views, extensive customization and personalization, and a whole host of game modes so you can play your way. So what are you waiting for? The M24 Chaffee is sitting there waiting to be unlocked and played. It's America's most underrated tank for a reason. Go use it. And using my links below, new and returning players that haven't played for at least 6 months will get a massive bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles, the Eagle of Valor vehicle decoration, 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of premium account. All this is available for a limited time only, so don't miss out. Again, it's completely free, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before the M7 had been canned, designers had toyed with the idea of upgrading the M5 with a 75mm gun, since they had about 4,000 M5s and it would be a shame to waste them. They managed to fit a 75mm gun into the turret of the M8 assault gun, creating the M8A1 or M8GMC. But the narrow turret ring, low ammo load, off-balance turret, open top and poor mounting of the gun meant that this vehicle never went anywhere. So they started from the start. Clean slate, but one using the same powertrain as the M5, which wasn't bad to be fair. The clean slate came with a strict rule. The vehicle will mount a 75mm gun, but will not, under any circumstances, weigh more than 20 tons. This was the T24. The design was entrusted to Chrysler with help from Cadillac, who had already done some work on an enlarged M5A1 hull design. Meanwhile, Rock Island Arsenal were working on the 75mm M6 gun, which ideally would pack the same punch as a 75mm M3 on a Sherman, but in a smaller package. Luckily, this work had already been done on the B-25H Mitchell medium bomber.
And 75mm cannon firing from the sky can and have sunk a destroyer.
Earlier B-25G aircraft mounted the cumbersome 75mm M4, but a far lighter version had been developed for the B-25H, known as the T13E1. On the Mitchell, this was used against enemy ships, but the lightweight, compact design of the T13E1 with its M19 concentric recoil system meant it would be a perfect fit for the new tank. It offered the same ballistic performance as a Sherman 75mm, but in a much smaller and lighter package. It even used the same ammunition. But this compact 75 was still considerably larger than the regular 37, and the turret ring needed to be 60 inches in diameter, a huge step up from the 47-inch turret ring of the M5. This was partially due to the fact that the new turret was required to hold 3 men, commander, loader, gunner, instead of the 2-man turret of the Stuart. This issue was solved by angling the sides of the T24 outwards, making the top of the hull wider than the bottom. And speaking of the hull, it was split into two, the fighting compartment and the engine compartment. And this is where the Chaffee really comes into its own. At the very rear were 2 engines, twin Cadillac V8s providing 148 horsepower each. These fed power into 2 hydromatic transmissions, modern automatic designs using fluid couplings. These, in turn, fed into the transfer unit, which combined the power of the 2 engines and also added the reverse gear. This transfer unit also allowed the T24 to operate using only 1 engine if needed, which is pretty nifty. The transfer unit then connected to the drive shaft, which then snaked through the centre of the vehicle and into the differential at the front, which sent power to the tracks and did all the braking. The point is that all of this just worked, and it worked quite well. Tried and tested components, sensibly arranged, easy to drive and maintain. A rare occasion where engineers actually designed things with mechanics in mind, unlike anything German or literally any car made after 2010. The ride was also nice and smooth, with low ground pressure thanks to the wide tracks and the new torsion bar suspension system, which was similar to that seen on the M18 Hellcat. This gave it great off-road performance and mobility, operating on terrain that was impassable for a Sherman or a Stuart. The real downside to the T24 was the armour. Hull armour was 1 inch or 25mm thick at the front and sides, angled at 60 and 12 degrees respectively. Towards the rear, this decreased to 19mm. The turret front and mantlet were both 1.5 inches thick, or 38mm, with the sides 1 inch thick. All were, at least, given some sort of angle to try and improve this. Obviously, this armour scheme meant the vehicle was very vulnerable, but on the other hand, this lightweight scheme meant that the T24 was highly mobile, which is critical for its role as a reconnaissance vehicle within the US doctrine. It also kept it below the 20-ton limit and avoided another M7 medium-style disaster. Sacrifices had to be made somewhere after all. In July 1944, the vehicle was standardised as the M24 light tank. The British christened it the Chaffee, after General Ardennes Chaffee, the first head of the US Armoured Force. But to fully assess the M24, we'll have to see how it fared during combat. In Europe, the demand for the new vehicle was nearly infinite. Light tank crews were still stuck with the M5 and were doing their best to avoid taking that into combat, using the Stuart for supply or evacuation duties behind the line. The first batch of 20 M24s arrived in Europe in December 1944. As they were en route to the 9th Army, 2 of them were requisitioned by units of the 1st Army, who were desperately trying to stop German panzers advancing through the Ardennes. These 2 vehicles were the first to see combat, fighting against the 6th SS Panzers as part of the 740th Tank Battalion. There were some concerns raised about the M24 being confused for a German vehicle. Its new shape and torsion bar suspension had people worried it would be mistaken for a Panther, and soon earned it the name the Panther Pup as a result. The other 18 vehicles arrived at the 744th Tank Battalion on Christmas Eve 1944 and were soon put to good use. Following Operation Grenade in February 1945, the unit gave a glowing report of the M24, commending its superior manoeuvrability and off-road performance, its rugged and reliable construction, its clear optics, easy maintenance, its low silhouette, and even its survivability against anti-tank weapons. However, they also brought up some issues, notably its thin armour, especially belly armour for mines, inadequate AT performance, and a small ammunition load for all calibers. Another issue that was brought up was the poor positioning of the 50 cal machine gun on top. Designed in theory for anti-aircraft use, the commander had to clamber onto the engine deck to use it, which made it impractical for shooting at much of anything. The men of the 6th Cavalry Recon Squadron had the same issue with the 50 caliber, but loved the M24 aside from that, saying it was a wonderful improvement of the M5, and even noting that they would prefer to have an M24 to the M4 Sherman, which is high praise indeed. But no matter how good the M24 was, or how many glowing reviews it received, there were just not enough of them to go around. In fact, by the end of the war in Europe, only 34% of US light tanks were M24s, the rest being obsolete M5s. It's not surprising then that no M24s ever saw combat in the Pacific theatre against the Japanese. Despite American troops having to go without, the M24 was also serving in the British forces as part of Lend-Lease, who were operating 302 of the little vehicles in reconnaissance squadrons in Europe to replace their own Stuarts. Even the Soviets bought 2 Chaffees for evaluation purposes, and one of these still sits in Kubinka Tank Museum today. The excellent M24 chassis served as the basis for a number of other special purpose vehicles that entered production towards the end of the war. 105mm and 155mm howitzers, anti-aircraft platforms, and recovery vehicles. But considering the late arrival of the M24 itself, it's not surprising that none of these variants ever served in the Second World War. However, the M37, M41 and M19 would end up serving in Korea, the next chapter of the M24's combat history, and not a good one. After World War II, worn-out M24s stationed in Japan were the first American armour sent to Korea in 1950, where they immediately ran into Soviet-made T-34 85s that outclassed them in almost every way. Yet another reminder that, while the M24 was an excellent scout, it was not a frontline tank. Things improved once M4s and M26s arrived, and the Chaffee could return to doing what it was actually designed for. In 1951, the M41 Walker Bulldog arrived on the scene. This vehicle was a larger, better version of the M24, and soon replaced it in American service. But this allowed the M24 to become an absolute export powerhouse, and it would soon form the backbone of many Allied armies, with over 90% of all M24s ever produced ending up in foreign hands. It was used to create the first Japanese armoured units in the 1950s, and massively bolstered French and Italian forces along with the M4 Sherman. The French were a big user of the vehicle, deploying it with some success in their various colonial wars. By 1954, the French were losing their war in Indochina. The Viet Minh had surrounded a French garrison at a remote valley called Dien Bien Phu and were slowly strangling it to death. The only way in was by air, but the M24 could not be air transported by a C-47, at least not in one piece. So they took them apart like a big Lego set and flew in 10 disassembled Chaffees piece by piece, reassembling them under fire as the Viet Minh forces shelled them from the hills above. By the time the garrison fell in May 1954, each one had been destroyed or abandoned, having fired a combined 15,000 rounds during the battle. Some of them are still there today, rusting in the jungle, a long way from Detroit. But France wasn't finished with the M24 quite yet. In Algeria, they initially deployed AMX-13s, but the AMX-13 did not have a good HE round, and the FLN did not have tanks. So, since they both had a 60-inch turret ring, the French mated AMX-13 hulls with the turrets of the M24 Chaffee, allowing the Frankentank to keep the mobility of the AMX, but with a potent HE round of the 75. The other way around was also tried. It looked more sensible, but was far less practical. Pakistan received large numbers of Chaffees and used them as frontline tanks rather than scouts, which, as we've established, was never what they were designed to do. In 1965, this was hardly ideal, as Pakistani M24s soon found themselves up against Indian AMX-13s. But even after that, Pakistan didn't replace them. 6 years later, those same Chaffees were now facing Indian PT-76s and T-55s. The Pakistanis lost all the Chaffees involved in that battle, and unsurprisingly, they didn't end up winning that war. By 1972, the Chaffee was nearly 30 years old and being retired even from the smallest armies. But the Norwegians saw things differently. They rebuilt 54 of their M24s under the new designation NM116, reportedly at a third of the cost of buying new tanks. NAPCO replaced the power pack with the engine from the M113 APC, the 75mm was swapped for a French 90mm D925, and the whole thing got new fire control systems and updated electronics. The NM116 served Norway until the early 1990s, retiring only after the collapse of the USSR. A tank designed in 1943, still defending a NATO border in 1993. You don't see many Tiger IIs pulling that off, do you?
Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Do remember to sign up using the links below and join me in making the M24 Chaffee the bane of German players' existence on PC, console and mobile for free. Remember, those of you who are new or maybe haven't played for 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack with vehicles, currency and more.
If you want to go deeper in any of the variants or operators I've skipped over, let me know in the comments below. Please do consider subscribing for more content like this, and if you do want to support the channel further, my Patreon gets you early, ad-free uploads, Discord access and exclusive videos, link below. Thanks to everyone already supporting me on there, and I'll hopefully see you all next time.